Plenary. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us and hanging in there on with our Take Root Conference 2020. I am so happy to see so many first-time Take Root attendees here with us today. It's been really great to see where all you are from: New Orleans, Texas, Oklahoma. We see you. We appreciate you. It has been a wonderful conference, and thank you so much for all of your participation and lovely shared experiences. I know that all of us are going to be able to take something from this weekend and use it to further progress reproductive justice and make sure that we continue to fight for the rights for individuals to have autonomy over their own bodies. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker this afternoon. State Representative Attica Scott serves the Kentucky House District 41, where she is on the Education, Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs and Veteran Military Affairs and Public Protection Committees. She served as an English immersion teacher in Taining County, Fujian Province, China in 2015, was an adjunct faculty member at Jefferson County and Technical College from 2013 to 2015, and an adjunct faculty member at Bellarmine University from 2009 to 2011. In 2010, Representative Scott graduated from the first class of Emerge Kentucky, which prepares Democratic women to run for office, and was recognized as a connector by Leadership Louisville as a civic and nonprofit community leader. She was awarded the 2011 National Woman of Vision Award by the Ms. Foundation for Women. Representative Scott was a 2013 member of the Bingham Fellows of Leadership Louisville and was featured Daughter of Greatness at the Muhammad Ali Center. In 2014, she helped to pass the pivotal legislation on Louisville Metro Government Council, including a ban the box ordinance and the historic minimum wage ordinance, as well as a resolution to restore voting rights to Kentuckians who have served their debt to society. In 2015, she was named a West Louisville Connector by the Leadership Louisville Center. In 2016, Representative Scott defeated a 34-year incumbent to become the first Black woman in nearly 20 years to serve in the state legislature. In 2017, Representative Scott was named to Essence Magazine's list of #Woke100 women in the United States, became a Rise to Run trailblazer, and began serving on the Emerge Kentucky Board of Advisors. In 2018, she graduated from the National Women in Government Leadership Program. Representative Scott provided leadership to a number of nonprofit board of directors, including Building Hope Kentucky, Women's Network Commonwealth Institute for Policy Issues and Civic Engagement Board of Fellows, La Casita Center, Highlander Center for Research and Education, We Shall Overcome Fund Advisory Board, the New Directions Housing Corporation, 7 County Services, Looking for Lilith Theater Company, Restorative Justice Louisville, National Organizers Alliance, Community Development Corporation, and Greater Friendship Baptist Church, Hispanic Latino Coalition of Louisville, and many, many more. Representative Scott is certified anti-racism trainer through Crossroads Ministry and the Commission on Religion in Appalachia. Her proudest accomplishment is being a mom to Advocate and Ashanti. And you can follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Attica Scott for Kentucky. Without further ado, Representative Attica Scott.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? Okay, fantastic. Just please holler if something messes up with my sound. So thank you for the invitation to take root and dig deeper into reproductive justice in my state. I believe deeply that the movement for Black lives is health justice. I believe deeply that we must change public policy if we want to truly address public health. I also believe deeply that we can only change public policy when we change the very face of political power itself, because representation does matter. I know that life feels chaotic right now for a lot of us. It's a little scary and uncertain. In this moment of overlapping crises, Black folks are getting hit the hardest, I truly believe, by many of them. But we all are facing a global pandemic, mass unemployment. I know because folks contact my office every single day about not getting their unemployment insurance, systemic racism and police violence, and climate change. We need a democracy that works for all of us. Every year that I have been in office in the People's House, the legislature has decided not to lift up women's health and well-being or to address issues like police violence or raise the wage. But instead, they have focused on ramming through arbitrary anti-abortion measures, which I vote against every single time. I voted for a Blue Lives Matter bill. I probably was the only person who voted no on that, and a gang bill. And the first time it went through, I was one of only 3 people who voted against that bill. I'm also very grateful to the people of District 41 who keep sending me back to Frankfurt, even when I'm the only person voting no on a piece of legislation. I was never surprised by the hatred, misogyny, patriarchy, racism, or sexism, but I was most definitely disappointed by it. I was naive enough to expect better. So rather than working to create innovative solutions to the real issues that Kentucky women and femme-identified people face, let alone Black and Latinx communities, the white majority in the Kentucky General Assembly resorted to tired tricks that play politics with women's health, added to the over-policing of Black people, and criminalized doctors who perform a safe and medically proven abortion procedure at our state's last remaining abortion clinic, a place where both of my kids have applied to be clinic escorts, but denied because they're, a little bit, well, let's just say they wish you would get in their face and not allow women to seek an abortion. But that's not what we're talking about. I love those two. As elected officials who serve the people of Kentucky, I believe that we could and should do better. As I said before, call me naive in the way that I believe, but as long as you call me Representative Scott while you call me naive, that's just fine. I was recently part of a Sister Reach webinar focusing on polling data from Kentucky related to Black women's health. Erin was on there with me, and I learned a lot. So this is a repeat for Erin, but I just want to share with you a little bit about what I learned. So 80% of women surveyed in Kentucky, and this is Black women, if I'm not mistaken, Erin, supported Roe v. Wade. Of course we do. I don't have those organs anymore. I got rid of them last year, but I still support a woman's right to her bodily autonomy, a femme-identified person's right to their bodily autonomy, my daughter's right to her bodily autonomy. And of course, Republicans in our Senate in DC are ramming through a Supreme Court nominee who doesn't believe the same. And they refuse to pass a COVID-19 relief package that focuses on the needs of people in my community. I live in the West End of Louisville, which is predominantly Black. We need economic relief for the millions of people in the United States who are suffering after having lost their jobs and who are struggling to pay rent and feed their families. We don't need political gamesmanship with a rushed Supreme Court nomination process. And that's why when people tell me to trust the process, I tell them no, because the process doesn't often work for people like me. So of course, I also learned from this polling data that financial insecurity has an influence on a woman's decision to bear children, especially when there is a 67-cent wage gap for Black women in Kentucky. I'm really tired of people walking over us as Black women, literally walking over our backs and putting their knees in our necks and acting like we owe them political allegiance when our issues are hardly ever at the forefront of anyone's agenda. That's not a red state issue, that's a state of emergency. And of course, young women between the ages of 18 to 34, my daughter's age group, stated that over-policing factored into their decision to give birth. As Black mothers, and I'm the mom of a son who is 25 and a daughter who is 19, we bear the weight of bringing children into a world where police can murder them with impunity. My Latinx siblings face the destructive and deadly presence of immigration and customs enforcement, and ICE is the very definition of over-policing. So really right there, Black folk and Latinx folks can build some real power to address this over-policing of our bodies. And of course, 54% of women in Kentucky stated that racism has a negative effect on their emotional and mental health. I see those negative effects every time I'm out at Injustice Square Park, raising my fist and raising my voice with good people seeking justice for Breonna Taylor. Just yesterday, for the second time in a week and a half, white nationalists shot at us while we were at the square. We are in a state of emergency. It's just not the kind that your Democratic governor or mayor would proclaim. It's a different kind of state of emergency that causes us to have policy priorities that centers the needs of Black folks. We have failed to do that time and time again, and yet we're told this is the most important election of our lives, and even then, our agenda is not centered by local, state, or federal people running for office. It's me speaking for myself. It's not the Kentucky Health Justice Network. Just want to put that out there. As politicians, our job is to address the barriers that keep Black people, femme-identified folks, our Latinx siblings, white folks who are living in poverty, and women from thriving in our Commonwealth. We must address institutional and systemic racism. Can't be afraid to say race and racism because they're real. For example, I filed the Crown Act to ban discrimination based on natural hair. I keep lifting up this bill because y'all, it's pretty innocuous. You would think anybody who wants to wear an afro, twist, locks, whatever the case may be, should be able to do so. The reality is schools in Kentucky can discriminate against you. I know my daughter experienced it. Employers can discriminate against you and apartment owners can discriminate against you. But still, the bill didn't get a chance to be heard this legislative session. I also believe wholeheartedly that we must pay people living wages. That's why I was the primary sponsor of the bill to raise the minimum wage in Louisville in 2014. And then the Kentucky Supreme Court, just a month after they requested a wage raise for themselves, decided that Louisville couldn't increase the wage for folks struggling right here at home. So I believe that no one should live paycheck to paycheck or no check to no check. And it's a burden that is carried by far too many women in our state. And quite honestly, I say this often, very few politicians struggle to make ends meet. And I don't know one person who would run for office and make $7.25 an hour or the $2.13 an hour for tipped workers. That's just not going to happen. I filed the pink tax because people who menstruate should not have a tax on these healthcare products. By eliminating the pink tax, we open the door of opportunity to folks who would then have more money to spend on other essential needs. We must address racism in healthcare. And that's why I filed the Maternal Care Act. I would have thought, with our lieutenant governor having given birth this year, that the administration would have been a champion of the Maternal Care Act. That didn't happen. But I'm not giving up. With Black women being 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women, we must answer this clear call to action. But the Kentucky legislature, again, has refused to acknowledge that Black lives matter. I'm beginning to see a pattern. Maybe it's my bills. But then again, not one person in the Kentucky Legislative Black Caucus has had their bills heard in the past 2 years. We need to expand affordable housing and address the housing crisis that our city is facing in the midst of a global pandemic. Louisville's eviction rate is twice the national average. With so many single moms and women-led households in our state, this is a big issue. We must acknowledge the direct connection between evictions and homelessness. In my neighborhood, in the west end of Louisville, in the Parkland neighborhood, I see people with all of their belongings out on the sidewalk, and we are doing very little to support people who are struggling. People are jobless and hungry. We have so much work to do in Kentucky. I know this for a fact. Childcare is almost as expensive as rent. And we don't talk about this much because it's seen as a women's issue. Still, even when, and I did this last week, check my calendar, even in 2020, we still believe that childcare is a women's issue. So we don't address it the way that we should. We also don't address all day free pre-K because we think that women can be home and should be home taking care of the kids. And we must address over-policing of Black people in our communities. This should not be a taboo conversation, and it is a matter of women's health and safety. Breonna Taylor's story reminds us of that. Breonna was a frontline worker who tweeted in December about starting a family in 2020. She tweeted in 2020 that 2020 was going to be her year, yet white police officers shot her to death and even watched for 5 minutes as she crawled down her hallway gasping her last breaths. Right now, she could be out, help saving lives. She was a first responder, just like LMPD, and yet we still haven't gotten justice for her. As the first Black woman to serve in the Kentucky House of Representatives in nearly 20 years, it is not lost on me that affronts to bodily autonomy fall hardest on Black communities and communities of color, as well as white working families. This is why I stand with the more than 260 state legislators across the country who are part of the Reproductive Freedom Leadership Council, state legislators from 43 states who are proudly standing up for reproductive health care and justice. We know that control over our bodies and our futures is not a political issue to trade away. It is a core component of our vision for a better country for all of us. I envision a commonwealth and a country where each of us can make personal decisions about our bodies and futures without government interference. The grassroots activism I have seen since I was elected in 2016 shows me that we will get there. I have filed Breonna's Law for Kentucky because justice for Black lives is a policy priority for me. I mean, I want people to be able to live and to thrive. And to me, living and thriving is a public health priority. We currently have 11 legislative co-sponsors of Breonna's Law, but we have 100 members of the House. So I just want to say that again, maybe in a different way. We currently have 11 legislative co-sponsors of Breonna's Law for Kentucky, and we have 100 members of the House. So, you can do the math to determine what that comes out to be, but it's barely 10% of the House of Representatives has signed on as a co-sponsor of Breonna's Law. And now I'm going to call out some of your favorites. We also have 38 members of the House who are Democrats. 11 people have signed on as a co-sponsor of Breonna's Law for Kentucky. We have 38 members of the House who are Democrats. So while we talk about reproductive justice in red states, as a Black woman, I have to lift up that Democrats are not always with us. We have so much work to do. I'm ready to do that work. I'm deeply honored to be part of this conversation with you. And I just wanted to share a few words to get us started into the conversation. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're about to have some facilitated Q&A.
I just need a moment to collect my thoughts because it's, Attica, Representative Scott, you mentioned it before. This is basically part 2 of the panel discussion that we had before this. And one of the issues that, we're facing in Kentucky, I know are not, just our issues, right? And we're seeing this nationally where even though, we have X amount of Democrats holding public office, we have X amount of Black men and women or individuals running for office, we are still hitting adversities, especially in states, in southern states, and just calling it for what it is, racism, just blatant racism and sexism. And for all these legislations, pieces of legislation that you developed and other Black members of our House and Senate have developed, for none of them to have been heard in the past 2 years says a lot for the state of Kentucky and how far we have yet to still go. But I know that Kentucky is not alone in this. And also too, I love that you actually did give us the numbers of who is, according to party, currently holding office. And Kentucky does have a Democratic governor, but at the same time, elements of racism still exist. And I honestly call them detrimental Dixiecrats. That's what I call them. That is my word that I use. And, for anyone who attends, who's attending this, y'all probably shaking your heads like, I know what a Dixiecrat is. And some of y'all, for some of y'all who don't know, those are Democrats who are Democrats, but are still pushing and facilitating or ignoring racist practices within government and policy. So, Representative Scott, with these, Dixiecrats, how can we maneuver around current policy to create change in our neighborhoods and our states?
Really good question, Erin. Thank you so much. And for me, it really is the core concepts of mobilizing and organizing people for action. I truly believe that's how we get this work done. I think about the fairness campaign as my model, because I want to do this with Breonna's Law. They have gone from county to county to county to get fairness ordinances passed, and in places where people never expected it. Well, that's probably what we're going to have to do with Breonna's Law, is go county to county, city to city across Kentucky, and ask these cities and counties to pass resolutions supporting Breonna's Law so that we can then apply pressure at the state level to get these folks who refuse to see us, acknowledge us, to pass Breonna's Law for Kentucky. So it's going to be mobilizing. It's going to really have to be white people across Kentucky contacting their elected officials, which, you know, doesn't happen enough, in my opinion, when it relates to issues that directly impact Black folks. Yes, white folks will, you know, teachers will stand up for teachers because they're mostly white across Kentucky, and will fight for their pensions, and will, you know, stand up for fairness, because we see, unfortunately, still across Kentucky, we think only white people are gay. And so we'll stand up for fairness. But then, right, but then when there's an issue that is very clearly about race, then sometimes it's crickets, right? It took so much for us to get people to speak up and contact their elected officials about the gang bill, for example. And even that, you know, was difficult to get people to understand that it's not an issue across Kentucky. In fact, it wasn't the issue that folks were trying to make it out to be in Lexington and Louisville, but we still had to explain our humanity to our white neighbors to get them to contact their elected officials. We're still going to have to do that with Breonna's Law. White folks are going to have to contact the Speaker of the House, who's white, right next door to Jefferson County and Oldham County, the wealthiest and healthiest county in the state. Contact David Osborne and tell him to bring Breonna's Law up for discussion in committee. That's white people's work. That's mobilizing one another. That's organizing one another for action. So I'm looking for y'all who are white, who are on here, to step up and do that work.
And with, you know, with that, you know, call to action from our white allies, let's talk about allyship for a second. Because I know that with the whole movement, Black Lives Matter, and everything that's going on in Justice Square Park here in Louisville, all the wonderful 501c3 organizations like Change Today, Change Tomorrow, La Casita, who have been putting in the work, Play Cousins Initiative. I can go on because I have so much love for them. And with all these, you know, 501c3 organizations and groups that are feeling empowered in the movement, how can we use allyship? And I talked about this the other day. How can we do allyship across organizations, across cultures and ethnicities the way it should be?
I appreciate that, Erin. And I actually think that we're beginning to even move away from the idea of allyship, because allies come and go. I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes y'all be with us, sometimes you won't. But I'm looking for people who are comrades with us, right? Who are right there beside us in this work, whatever the work may be, and who are going to be there and who will speak up and use their voices even if we're not there. Not people who will be with us, you know, publicly, maybe show up to a rally, but then when you're in a meeting and it's all white people, you're not saying anything about the issues that we've been discussing or marching together about. I need comrades. I need folks who I know, if you're in a meeting and it's all white folks, y'all gonna say, you know, what are we doing to dismantle racism? What are we doing to make sure that we defund police, for example, and reallocate those funds? What are we doing to make sure that Latinx folks in Louisville and in Kentucky don't have to fear immigration and customs enforcement? Erin shouldn't have to be in those rooms for those conversations to happen. That's comradeship. Allyship can come and go. So what I need are people who I know, yes, you know, Meg's gonna be there. I have no doubt about that. Meg's gonna come hard about the issues that are important to all of us. That's a given. You know, I know Ashley's gonna be there. Ashley's gonna show up and stand side by side, but also if we aren't there, Ashley's gonna do the work that Ashley needs to do. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for comrades. And I believe that, you know, what that for me right now is looking like is people who show up at Injustice Square Park, not just to take a picture and post it and say, you know, I was there, but people who are showing up on the regular, people who are helping us feed folks, people who are making sure that we've got tents and sleeping bags for folks who are houseless, who are out there saying her name. That's what I'm looking for. People who are doing that on a regular basis. And even if you don't feel comfortable showing up because we are in the midst of a global pandemic, send it by somebody else if you can. Or, you know, if you can contribute to the Kentucky Alliance Cash App or the Bell Project. Shoot, my daughter and I were arrested with the Louisville organizer of the Bell Project. Donate to the Bell Project. because we need to get these 700 folks who have been arrested for protesting while nobody has been arrested for murdering Breonna. They need support. They need bail support. So donate to the Bail Project. There's so much that white folks can do. And that's directly related to race. When it comes to women's and femme identified folks' reproductive health and justice, you know, I'm naive enough to keep hoping that more men are going to speak up and use their voices, and men identified folks, because I'm be honest with you, it doesn't really happen in our state capital. Unfortunately, even people who are part of my own party have voted every single time for bills that are designed to take away my right to make my own choices about my body. And so they need to step up. And I'm so tired of hearing people say, well, I have a daughter. Well, that means nothing when you're voting against her best interest. So, you know, that is not the kind of language that I'm interested in. So they got to step up too, or they got to go, right? Stop voting for these people who are, just because they have a D behind their name, stop voting for them. They're not doing what they need to do for us and for our people that we love across Kentucky. And step up and run, right? You know, step up and run yourself. That's comradeship, knowing that you need to step into those spaces where it's clear that other people are completely failing us.
Well, thank you for that response. Lynn actually has a question for you in the chat. It says, they said, Representative Scott, in places that have not passed bans on no-knock laws that were originally allowed as part of the war on drugs, do you think such home invasions could be used to find the drugs that are effective in ending pregnancies, such as misoprostol and mifepristone? I know I butchered those names, but there you go.
Well, yeah, the reality is these no-knock warrants can be used for whatever law enforcement chooses to use them for. Many of us are beginning to suspect that LMPD, Louisville Metro Police Department, was actually looking for drug money that we would never even know about, that they would then have at their own discretion. So they can use them for whatever they want to use them for, but they're highly dangerous even for law enforcement. My goodness. Across the country, we have officers who get shot, some who get shot and killed while executing these no-knock search warrants. Kentucky has a standard ground law, the Castle Doctrine, which is exactly what allowed Kenny Walker to end up ultimately being released from incarceration, is the fact that we do have the Castle Doctrine here. So they're highly dangerous. And so I just am not supportive of them. I appreciate states like Pennsylvania and Virginia and Tennessee and other states across the country who now have filed, and in some cases passed, Breonna's law much faster than even Kentucky, where Breonna lives, who've already passed Breonna's law in their states to end no-knock warrants, because they know that they are deadly both to the person living in their home and to law enforcement who are serving those warrants.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm going to talk about, just Metro government for a second, and I would love to hear your thoughts as a lawmaker and as a resident of the city of Louisville. I am homegrown, born and raised Louisville, Kentucky, so my home has a special place in my heart. So as a member of legislature, when Louisville Metro, and I'm gonna give y'all some history on that person. Louisville Metro, when we became Metro, when we merged governments, there was an ordinance, not ordinance, but there is a law intact in Frankfurt that states how Metro government is to be ran. Now, with everything that has happened with Breonna Taylor and the protests and how her case was handled, how much of how things were handled were due to that Metro merger legislation, and what should change regarding that legislation to give the city of Louisville more autonomy into how to handle issues like we're seeing right now?
Thank you for that question, Erin. And again, I connect it right back to this conference and talking about reproductive health and reproductive justice, because Breonna Taylor never had a chance to make some of those decisions for herself, because her life was taken when she was only 26. So while Fisher, who is some people's mayor, I don't consider him mine because he has decided to abdicate his responsibility to me and my community. But while he used the excuse that state law would not allow him to fire the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor, that was a lie. And then he turned around and tried to fix it up by saying, well, he didn't want to fire the officers because he didn't want them to sue the city of Louisville. I'm going to be honest, as a taxpayer in Louisville, they can sue all they want to, but fire them. Fire them and let them sue, because you still ended up paying the family $12 million, which that is not the value of a human life at all, but you still ended up paying that out to the family. And so let's not act like it was really about you caring about officers suing the city. It was the fact that you could not bring yourself to see this Black woman having justice, that you could not even see her humanity when we're supposed to be in a compassionate city. So it wasn't true that state law would not allow for the officers to be fired, but instead it was a personal decision made by Fisher to not fire the officers so they wouldn't sue. So what that means, though, for us going forward is we need to look at legislation at the state level to address what happened here in Louisville. And so you've got people who are working on a number of different pieces of legislation. You've got Representative Lisa Wilner, who's working to demilitarize police. Y'all, I'm in the midst of a lawsuit with ACLU right now to sue the police department because they tear gassed me and my daughter and dozens of other people who were out the second night of protest, Friday, May 29th. That tear gas, that chemical weapon of warfare, can destroy a woman, a girl's, femme-identified person's ability to, if they choose to, somewhere in the future, to be able to bear children and to bear healthy children. That's why those weapons are not currently used in war anymore, but yet they were used on us right here on domestic soil. And so, that to me is a reproductive justice conversation. So you've got Representative Wilner working to ban those chemical weapons. I'm working on Breonna's Law, and I didn't really explain it to folks who are not from Kentucky, but Breonna's Law would end no-knock warrants. It would also mandate that officers involved in a deadly shooting or other police incident have to submit to alcohol and drug testing, because we had an officer who wandered off for more than an hour. Nobody knew who he was, just hanging out somewhere, then came back and no questions asked. And to also mandate that body cameras are worn and turned on when warrants are being issued. We found out about 3 months later that actually the officers did have on body cameras, and there was some footage of the shooting at Breonna's home, when we were initially told for about 90 days to 100 days that there was no body camera footage because body cameras were not turned on. This whole thing full of lies. But that's not what the conference is about. So Breonna's Law has those three main components. And for me, to get to your question, Aaron, that's one of the ways that we address what happened the night of March 13th, is we make sure this doesn't happen to any other person's child, niece, cousin, nephew, uncle, friend, etc.
Thank you for that. And on the road with Breonna's Law, Carol Mason asked, so if Roe gets repealed and women have to rely on mifepristone and mifepristol to terminate unwanted pregnancies, it sounds like the police could arrest them with a no-knock warrant. How do we spread the word on that? Also, how can we mobilize reproductive justice advocates to fight for Breonna's Law?
Great. So 2 questions there. The first question is, again, police can, if they have a judge like we had here with Judge Mary Shaw, who doesn't really ask questions, may not even read the search warrant requests and just signs them, you could have law enforcement who is breaking down the door of someone's home because of a drug that the federal government has said they are not supposed to have. So that could happen. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. That's why we need every single state to look at their laws to see if they need to pass a Breonna's Law in their state to end these no-knock warrants. You also have to look at these judicial races and pay attention to those and make sure that folks are running who are going to actually pay attention to these requests for search warrants and actually read them and ask some daggone questions about them. And then your second question was around what can people do to support Breonna's Law? Well, folks right here in Kentucky can make sure that their state representative is signed on as a co-sponsor. Again, doesn't matter if it's somebody you don't like or it's your favorite. They shouldn't get away with not I mean, this is the most sustained protest Kentucky has ever seen in its history. And for anyone to walk away and act like they don't notice or they don't care or they're not going to center Black lives, I believe everyone in Kentucky has a responsibility to hold their state representative accountable. Folks across Kentucky and outside of the Commonwealth can sign on as a community co-sponsor of Breonna's Law for Kentucky. That's something that really has never been done with legislation here in the state, where community folks can sign on to say, you believe that Kentucky deserves Breonna's Law. So maybe in the chat, if I get a chance, I'll put a link to my website, which has the page where you can sign up as a community co-sponsor. We've got over 4,000 people across the country who have signed on so far.
And a part of the community for the record, KHJN is a community co-sponsor, and we are proud to say that we are, and we do not filter that. We fully support Breonna's Law, as well as several organizations here in Louisville, Kentucky, and beyond. So on the same track as, I'm a policy person. I love policy, study political science. It's my thing. River City LMPD, River City FOP is currently able to negotiate their collective bargaining agreement right here, right now. And they're trying. So with the collective bargaining agreement, it has the potential to erase misconduct records, restrict delays or delay interrogations. It gives officers unfair access to information. It can disqualify complaints, and it can also require the city to pay for misconduct and not the officer, releasing officers of personal liability for their actions. And it also limits oversight and discipline. And this is just a quick summary of all the things that this contract will have. Now, I know that you have a history in the labor movement with Jobs with Justice, and working with labor, and I grew up in a labor household. It feels insulting. I have to imagine that it feels insulting to see someone use the plight of fairness and workers' rights in this way. How has FOPs across the country been able to taint the actual labor movement of blue collar and working class peoples by putting in their agreements and their contracts matters which would basically not hold them liable for their actions against the very people that they are, quote unquote, sworn to protect?
Yeah, so that's been a tough one, right, in the labor movement, because the reality is that the Fraternal Order of Police actually separates itself away from the rest of the labor movement. When I was at Jobs with Justice as coordinator, the Fraternal Order of Police did not see them as part of the movement. They set themselves apart and operated in that way. I also served on Louisville Metro Council for 3.5 years. And so, I was one of those people who at that time, because I was, again, naive and trusting enough to think that the mayor would negotiate a fair contract, I voted for their contract when I served on Metro Council, and I regret that vote. And so now we have the opportunity to make sure that this current contract, which is important for people to know, this is a bridge contract they're negotiating. It's not even their actual full contract. So it doesn't even make sense. Why are they negotiating this bridge contract right now in the midst of this uprising that we're experiencing as we seek justice for Breonna Taylor? Something ain't right. And so we need to make sure that we pay close attention to that. We have the opportunity, though, to halt that bridge contract in its place. So the people of Louisville are phenomenal. They stopped it this week in committee, the Labor and Economic Development Committee, and the contract was tabled, thank goodness. So the people of Louisville have to continue that advocacy and stop it again before it goes any further, because FOP and Fisher need to renegotiate their contract, while we have people crying out to defund, reallocate, dismantle this whole department, and reimagine public safety. So that's where we are right now, and we can do that work in Louisville. And people can do it across the country in their cities and in their counties. We've seen it. We've seen the police departments across the country. We only have a handful of them, but we've seen examples where they have been defunded and dismantled, money reallocated to meet economic and social needs, and a reimagining has been created of what public safety looks like. Rehiring, doing a whole new rehire process where you look at these folks' bodies who are applying to be police officers and make sure they don't have 3%er or other white nationalist tattoos on their bodies, because that's part of the problem that we have with law enforcement.
Thank you for that response. So what do you think that would look like with Louisville, just Louisville, not just defunding the police and, you know, reallocating that money to communities, but like does that look like for you? Like where that money would go, how much is needed in those areas? I mean, I have my own opinions, but I really want to hear from someone who is doing that work every single day and has to deal with, you know, legislation on a daily basis. If you could tell us a little bit of that.
Sure. So based on what I live myself in my neighborhood, and also what I talk to people about are their biggest needs, housing. We have a housing crisis, and that's a huge need where we need to truly reallocate some of that money. The neighborhood where I live, Parkland, 30% of the buildings are abandoned or vacant, including the houses and the businesses and industry. 30% are abandoned or vacant. That means they're boarded up and people could be living there. There's a huge need for food access. Food justice is real in Louisville, and people need access to healthy foods. And we just don't necessarily have that where I live. In fact, when our one grocery store was shut down because some white kids from Newburgh came and busted out the windows at our Kroger, we did not have anywhere for seniors to be able to go to get food. One grocery store to serve all of these neighborhoods. So that's an issue: food access, food justice. Public transportation, we need a much more robust public transportation system. We could reallocate funding for public transportation. For 6 months when I was on Louisville Metro Council, I didn't have a car. Somebody had smashed into my vehicle, totaled it, and I just didn't have the money to get a new car. So I was with my kids, getting them on the bus to school, getting the doctor's appointments, the doctor, my full-time job, and Louisville Metro Council. Our transportation system is just not designed for real life. So we need funding for that. We need to support childcare. We need to support all day pre-K. There are other places where we could put money that is so desperately needed in economic and social areas that we're not doing. We could help, support, Aaron, you mentioned all these different nonprofits that exist doing really good work. We have after school and out of school nonprofits that could use additional financial support. When COVID recedes, and I believe that it will recede, we're going to be sending our babies back to school and back to daycare and back to after school and out of school programs. We need to fund those initiatives. So there are lots of different places where I believe we could send our money that we don't do right now. Instead, we're cutting those services rather than fully funding them. In fact, in Louisville, policing is 2/3 of our city's budget. That is a ring the alarm number right there. 2/3 of the city's budget, ring the alarm. We got some work to do. And then, just to take your question a little bit further, Aaron, for me, we need to reimagine as well what public safety looks like. And not even public safety, because I just I don't feel like that's what we're talking about. For me, it's community safety. How do we keep our communities healthy and safe? We can do that collectively when, my district is very unique from a lot of folks who serve in the legislature. It's literally 50% white, goes way out to the East End, predominantly white East End, all the way out St. Matthews, Westport Road. 50% Black, goes almost all the way to Chickasaw Park. So I get to see the differences every single day. I can drive through St. Matthews and the 5 small cities that I have in District 41, never see a police car, never see police presence. White teenagers not getting harassed by police, never see it. But they also have everything they need. They don't ever have to leave their area to go to the grocery store, the doctor, dentist, gynecologist, whatever they need exists. Then I come home. We have to leave our neighborhoods for everything, for just about everything. and we're overly policed. Police are always around harassing kids. I've seen them harassing kids just walking down the street. When you have neighborhoods that have what they need to survive and to thrive, you don't need that heavy police presence. So we can do our own community safety and take care of one another when we have food to eat, when our bellies are full, when people have jobs that pay living wages, when kids are able to go and do after school, out of school programs, when, you know, somebody like me who is a single mom of 2 kids can send my kids to childcare and afford it and go to work. When we have those needs met, then we don't need to have a heavily armed, militarized police force.
Thank you for your answer. In the area of reproductive justice, the state of Kentucky has one clinic, and that is the EMW clinic that is downtown. We have absolutely just one clinic. And it is downtown Louisville going east out of, you know, the business district, but further from West Louisville, which is predominantly poor, predominantly African American, Black, people working, you know, minimum wage, blue collar. And what we are finding here at KHJN is that there are a couple things. There is the issue of reproductive justice seeming very white, and there's the assumption that you know, Black people, people of color are not involved in the reproductive justice movement. And two, making sure that reproductive materials such as emergency contraception, free contraceptives are available in areas such as West Louisville, Portland, even South Louisville and Taylor Boulevard. How do you see reproductive justice growing to accommodate more diverse areas, and what areas does reproductive justice need to grow and mature in to accommodate multiple populations and groups?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Erin. I've seen it for a long time. It's like, it's not only seen as a white movement, but it is a white movement. And I say that to the extent that it's like anytime we try to incorporate racial justice into this conversation around reproductive justice, it's like there's a pushback. And so that's really problematic. And that's, you know, one of the reasons I'm glad to see you at KHJM is because I know you can push that conversation to say, you know, if we're not talking about police violence, we're not talking about reproductive justice. We just aren't. And so we've got to talk about all these issues that we're facing and connect them. They're all intersected. And so for me, part of what has to happen is I do a lot of work with Latinx communities. We've got to truly develop and dig deeper into cultural understanding, right? And knowing how to be part of and navigate and totally join in with different communities and cultures and respect those communities and cultures and value them and center their needs and step back when it's time to step back. Because it doesn't always have to be people who are not part of the community trying to take the lead. The same with Black folks. Like there are folks throughout the 9 neighborhoods that make up West Louisville that would love to see more engagement and involvement around reproductive justice in our neighborhoods. But you have to come correct. You got to be respectful. You got to be mindful of our history, our culture. You know, that history is so important. I mean, we're not that far removed from the Tuskegee experiment. We're not that far removed from Black women's bodies being abused by doctors as they experimented to figure out, you know, what kind of surgery works they can perform on our bodies, you know, to remove our, you know, cysts from our ovaries, for example. So we're not that far removed from that history. So you got to know that history when you come into a community. And it's got to be about relationship building. You got to build relationships with people, and those relationships have to be authentic. So it might not be that you're going to be able to send a white person in. I know early on in my comments, I talked about calling me Representative Scott. And I say that publicly for a real reason, because I've been in meetings where folks would call white people and especially white men by their position and title, and then they call me by my first name. And then when I say something, they get mad. So you know, I when you come into my community and you're talking to an elder, you got to put a handle on that. I wish I would call somebody who is, you know, 15, 20 years older than me by their first name. That is not going to happen, right? And I'm almost 50 years old and I know better. So, I've seen it. When I was at Jobs with Justice, I saw it, where white folks would try to come into West Louisville, do some organizing, mobilizing, and would call older Black people by their first names. And then we didn't hardly ever see them again because they couldn't get anywhere. So those kinds of things have to be respected and valued. You don't have to like it, but you do have to respect it and value it. I don't show up with folks at La Casita without knowing that I need to step back and know what my role is, be very clear that it's not my space, but I'm trying to engage and build relationships. And, if folks are doing whatever it is that they're doing and it's not time for me to be in the midst of that circle, I'm not going to be in the midst of it. So, that's just what I have to offer.
Thank you so much for your answer. In recent news, and we actually found this news out during our conference. I found it out from my operations director, Ashley, who told me this after we just finished watching the personhood documentary. But on the 16th, it was reported that the appeals court plans to uphold Kentucky's law on abortion clinic rules for hospitals and ambulances. So for those of y'all who aren't, here, what that means is that with the 2-to-1 vote, that Kentucky may require abortion clinics to obtain signed agreements with hospitals and ambulance services to transport and admit patients into an emergency room for an emergency situation. So that means that everyone's going to have their own ambulance contract. Contracts cost money, which means that it's going to financially hurt existing clinics within the state. How can people fight back against, courts and different things like that when it's not necessarily a ballot issue or have been placed on a ballot, or depending on the state or the situation? How can you make these issues ballot issues to be voted on?
Well, and they are legislative issues. So the legislature in Kentucky decided it hates women. And so we've seen that over and over again with legislation that they passed. So this is another example of that. And again, I go back to my point around paying much closer attention to these judicial races. In Jefferson County in 2020, we're going to have 43 judicial races, y'all. 43 judicial races. So you got to pay attention to who's running, because eventually those are the folks who get appointed to Supreme Court positions. So please pay attention and know where they truly stand on issues, because, and I mean, they aren't going to be able to tell you a whole lot about where they stand, but you can get an idea with their response to some of the questions that they are able to answer. So really pay closer attention to these judicial races, because they are the ones making these decisions about our lives. And a 2-to-1 decision, the fact that we have three people making that decision, 3 people, y'all, that made that decision. And 3 people is in no way a representative group of people. There's no way that those 3 justices at all reflect the diversity of Kentucky. So we've got people making decisions about our lives who might not even look like us, let alone come from where we come from. So that's a problem that we've got to address. Aaron, your question was around a ballot initiative. So in Kentucky, we can have ballot initiatives every 2 years. I serve on the committee, Elections and Constitutional Amendments, that actually addresses this issue. We can have ballot amendments every 2 years in Kentucky. We've got 3 on the ballot for Jefferson County this year, 2 for the entire Commonwealth. And so what that means is it'll be 2022 before there's another chance to get an initiative on the ballot. The way that happens is, there has to be a state senator, state rep who sponsors a bill like what's on the ballot this year around extending the term of office for district court judges to 8 years, 8 freaking years, almost a decade before we can hold them accountable. And so there was a legislator who was the sponsor of that bill. It went through our committee in the House, and passed the House, went through the Senate, passed the Senate, and was, added to the ballot. So that's the process. So it would really be about finding someone who was a representative who you felt like this is a person who could probably get this ballot initiative through. We don't have what some other states have, which is where you can get do a petition drive to get an issue on the ballot. We just don't have that in Kentucky. And I'm sure that's by design, right? That's to really silence the voice of the people, because that's really how people get to speak up, is when they have this opportunity to have a petition ballot initiative. We don't have that in Kentucky. We make you go through the legislative body, which is inherently racist, sexist, homophobic, and it's not reflective of us, we the people.
All of my intersectionalities. I mean, basically, that's what it is. We have a couple of questions in our chat. The first coming from Teak Franklin. They asked, Representative Scott, how do you find the courage to always show up as the lone voice in legislature or in the professional circles you exist?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, I found the courage when I lost my election on Louisville Metro Council. I had it before then. I definitely wasn't with my colleagues on Metro Council on all the issues either. But I really found it with that loss, because what that loss taught me was that life goes on after you lose an election. That's like not the end of life, right? You pick up and you keep going. And so what I remind myself of all the time is, this is not my seat. I'm the current occupant of the District 41 seat to Frankfort, but it's not mine. I don't own it. And my name is not on it. There were people before me, there will be people after me. So if the people in District 41 decided that I was no longer the person they wanted to represent them in Frankfort, that's fine. Life will still go on for me. God willing, I'll still have my 2 children who I'm a mother to, and that's the most important thing to me. But I also have amazing people in District 41 who keep sending me back to Frankfort. So I'm very grateful to them. And the past 2 election cycles, they've sent me back unopposed, 2018 and now 2020. And so I'm obviously doing something that the people in the district respect and value. And then what that has meant is, yes, there are many times where I'm the only no vote on an issue, or it just might be 3 or 4 of us who are voting no on an issue, and that's just fine. Even the bill 2 years ago, the school safety measure, actually last session, 2019, I voted no on the school safety measure, not because I don't want our schools to be safer, but because I don't want more armed police in our children's schools. And now people are beginning to see why that was important. Now I'm beginning to have some colleagues who are saying things like, oh, you were making some good points when you spoke up about that issue, and now we're seeing it. And now they want to have conversations about how they then go back and address that school safety bill to try to pull out armed police in our school buildings. So I have a different perspective. I was, raised in the projects of Beecher Terrace here in Louisville. My perspective is vastly different from most of the people who serve in Frankfort. And I'm going to bring that wholeheartedly to my service.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Let's talk about some of the amendments and how, I know that you are on the committee that puts amendments on ballots. Let's talk about language. I had a wonderful conversation with Pepis, who is actually here in this with us today. And a large part of our conversation was based around language and communication, right? So a lot of the things that we see on ballots or just coming out of Frankfort or coming out of Metro is that the way things are worded are often designed to misguide the voters and misguide the public. When they're voting yes, it's really no. When they're voting no, it's really yes. And there can be a lot of confusion. Is that a way to disenfranchise voters, especially voters who have the most to lose?
Oh gosh, Erin, you're gonna get me started. So, my first session in Frankfort, I'm up there, I'm like, yes, let's do this. I remember asking for, one of the bills that I was looking at, I asked if we could change the language from, most of our bills are say he. I don't think we put she in bills until probably the past decade. So most things say he. So I was asking, could we just do them or they and not have, anything that was gender specific? Oh my gosh, the director of the Legislative Research Commission came to my office to sit down and talk to me and let me know how that was an impossibility. We couldn't do it. It would literally be changing thousands of Kentucky revised statutes. And what am I thinking? And oh my gosh. And so I was like, you know what? I need you to calm down. Because I know it's probably what he was thinking about me. And so we did not do that because folks up there would have lost their stuff. So the reality is that we have amazing staff in the Legislative Research Commission. I will say that first and foremost. And some of them are asked by legislators to do things that they are fundamentally opposed to. And they also have families to feed. So you can either do what the legislator says to do, or you can lose your job. So when we were, dealing with the pension issue with teachers, every single pension bill, including the sewage bill, were terrible bills. Yet our staff was being asked to write those terrible bills. So because legislators asked them to do so. So yes, we have bills that are overly complicated. They're written in a way that make it difficult for people with a sixth grade language to understand. And I always say use sixth grade as my barometer, because when I taught at our community college, that's one of the things that we were reminded of as professors, is that most people in the country have a sixth grade reading and comprehension level. So we should be thinking in that way. Our bills are not written like that. So Marcy's Law, which is a ballot initiative amendment this year on our ballot, got thrown out in 2018. It was on the ballot. It actually passed, but the Supreme Court threw it out throughout that vote because it was a terribly written bill. When I tell you it was poorly written, it was a leading question to make you just vote yes, even if you actually wanted to vote no. And even this year, we have the question with the district court judges. That's 3 questions that's in one constitutional amendment. Constitutional Amendment 2 asks you about extending the term of service of Commonwealth's attorneys, extending the service of district court judges, and licensure for judges. 3 questions in one. So what happens is, if you are a voter who may not be following politics closely, or you have that 6th grade reading or comprehension level, you're not sure what to do. Most of us are not sure what to do, right? I like the one about licensure for judges to be, practicing attorneys for 8 years before they're a judge. But I don't want a Commonwealth's attorney or a district judge to serve 8 years. So I'm a no, right? I mean, what else am I supposed to do? So I'm a no. And so it puts a dilemma on the voters of Kentucky, and it is intentional. I believe that wholeheartedly. Not only, to your question, Aaron, yes, to disenfranchise voters and their ability to determine their future and their democracy and how their Commonwealth will operate, but also to do that, I believe, to all of us, right? It's designed to maintain this system of oppression. It really is designed to maintain this system of oppression. Even Marcy's Law, we already have a Victims' Bill of Rights, and now we're wanting to put that into the Constitution of Kentucky, a constitution that's going to be highly difficult to change, and it always is, as Constitution should be, difficult to change, although they weren't really designed for Black folks. But still, I'm just going to put it out there. Constitutions are difficult to change, and so you've got these victim advocates groups who want Marcy's Law. Then you have someone like me who, of course, I support victims and advocacy for victims. And you have a Bill of Rights. You already have a Bill of Rights. So there's a long way of saying that, yes, you're absolutely correct, Aaron, that this is about disenfranchisement. It's about misleading voters, and it's about maintaining systems of oppression.
And speaking of, I love reading our Constitution because, we're only one of 4 commonwealths left in the whole United States of America. And people think, well, you're still a state. Yeah, that's true. But our Constitution is just different. And that's a part of just, our structure as a state. Now, with everything involving Breonna Taylor, people nationally have become painfully aware of the issues of our Attorney General. And there's a lot of conversation around that amendment we just talked about being, well, one of the reasons that we're talking about qualification is because of our current Attorney General and his incompetency in handling the issue of, Breonna Taylor handling her case and handling the press and just, doing the right thing, right? So do you see in the future where we are actually going to address some of these old, never touched, never bothered standards that we have for seats such as attorney general and judges, so that we won't ever have this issue of incompetency, again, due to lack of experience?
I do, but in all honesty, Aaron, it goes back to my point around people running for office. We're not going to address them until we get people in office who have the political will to do so. Our current state house and state senate would never, ever address, for example, the issue of the attorney general qualifications, ever, because this suits their needs. This is the attorney general they want to suit their needs. So they wouldn't do it. So that means we've got work to do in Kentucky. And really, I'd say all across the country, I bet y'all got work to do to make sure that you have people in office who are going to take on these issues, who are going to look at the state's constitutions and say, where and how do we need to make changes, and let's make those changes. So folks got to run for office. You got to support good people running for office, and that support is financial, but it's not only financial. Make phone calls, do all the things that you're supposed to do to help people run for office, because that's how we make fundamental change.
Thank you for that. And speaking of running for office, I know that, I myself have thought about it. I know of several friends and several friends and associates that I've talked to. We've all talked about it. And even people that I'm meeting at, here at KHN, I would love to run for office. There's this layer of intimidation that exists. People feeling like I'm not educated enough. I didn't go to college. I didn't do this and that. So there's like this fear. And well, there is the desire and the will and the eagerness to do it. There's that layer of doubt, and it's the doubt that's been put there by those who don't want want people like us and want people who are everyday people in those seats. What advice would you give to anyone who just has that burning in their heart to want to just muster up the courage and throw their name in the ring, when there's so much doubt and so much judgment around them?
Run for office anyway. I mean, seriously, because I I mean, really, I am inspired when I go to Injustice Square Park. I'm meeting so many young people who are saying, I want to run for office. I mean, these are the people that we have in office. I should definitely be able to run. And I'm saying you sure should, and you can. So, if you're looking for a political mentor, I'm more than, happy to be supportive. And I encourage their energy, right? And their interest in running for local office. They're looking at Metro Council like, really? These folks actually, in the midst of our protests, they voted to give Louisville Metro Council the Louisville Metro Police Department more money in the midst of our protests, and we're right across the street from y'all. Okay, I see. And so, yes, so there are folks who are looking to run for those seats. There are folks who are looking at the state legislature and they're saying, oh, so Democrats are supposed to be good, right? But yet we have 38 and only 11 signed on as co-sponsors of Breonna's law. Okay, well, then we got some of y'all who need to go too. So we'll be running in 2 years for those seats. That's what folks are beginning to look at. And I encourage that. And I often share my story that, I ran for office 10 years ago, Jefferson County Public Schools Board of Education, because my 2 kids were in the school system. I didn't win that race, but I didn't give up. And a year later, I was appointed to Louisville Metro Council. Then I lost the seat 3.5 years later when I ran for re-election, and I still didn't give up. And a year later, found myself running for the State House to serve in Frankfort. Don't give up. A loss is not a loss. A loss is this one wasn't for you, but the next one might be. And I also say to folks, when I was running for Board of Education for JCPS, it was to represent one school district. I now serve on the Education Committee in Frankfort to serve all 120 counties in Kentucky and their school districts. So I went from the possibility of being a school board member for one district to now looking at the issues for every single school district across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So there was something else that was meant for me. That seat wasn't. The other thing I say is that I'm a Democrat. I'm a Democrat by choice. And I also choose to criticize and challenge that party as much as possible because it should do better when it doesn't. But I'm also a graduate of the first class of Emerge Kentucky, which trains Democratic women to run for office. get into those training programs. They exist everywhere. There's Rise to Run, which trains young women ages 16 to 24 to run for office. There's Higher Heights for America, which focuses on trainings and workshops for Black women who are interested in running for office. Lots of programs exist. Connect to them. And also, encourage the young people in your life to, shadow an elected official for a day to see what that's really like for them. I always open up that opportunity for folks in Frankfort. In Kentucky, young people up to high school can be House pages and serve on the House floor during the session, or college students can be interns. So there are those opportunities that exist for young people to begin to get comfortable, because I know it's uncomfortable. Government is a hot mess. And so they don't want, like Aaron said, folks like us serving in office. So they create an environment that they think we should be intimidated by, but I'm not intimidated. I mean, I look around and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what we got. And so, I just keep on doing what I'm supposed to do. And I think everyone else should do the same. I'm going to tell you now, there's absolutely nobody in office you should be intimidated by. Not one person, not a single one. So please erase that from your thinking, because there are a lot of people who are in office who shouldn't be, who don't deserve to be, who are unqualified to be in office. And by unqualified, I'm not talking about academics. I have an undergraduate and graduate degree, but that is not a qualification to run for office. And so I just want to put that out there, that doesn't necessarily, just because you got some degrees behind your name doesn't mean that you should be in office, because people who have degrees behind their names also are people who are passing hateful legislation and oppressive legislation. So don't be intimidated, run for office, ask for the support you need, and change some of this stuff so we don't have to be having this conversation again in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. And just also to just kind of like tie this in, people tend to pass over smaller offices because they're looked at as like, oh, this isn't important. Clerk isn't important. Like sheriffs aren't important because they only deliver warrants, and things like that. But because of that, there there are people who are willing to take advantage of that and then make it difficult to, maybe you have some paperwork that you're trying to do and then it gets changed because, it was seen as something unimportant. Now someone is looking to disenfranchise others and uses that position to do so. Can you stress, stress the importance of these, smaller positions that even though they're not thought of every day, they still matter?
Oh my gosh, Aaron, so true. I mean, think about county clerk. Right now, in the midst of COVID-19, all across this country, county clerks are probably some of the most important people serving in office right now in every state across the country, because the county clerks are the people who are managing how we vote right now. So yes, county clerk is important. The I don't know, I'm trying to think of something else that people kind of take. School board. I think people actually sometimes write off school board too. And oh my gosh, it's so important who's serving on these school boards, because they actually address a lot more issues than I think sometimes folks realize. For example, our Board of Education here in Jefferson County about, I don't know, might have been about 10 or 11 years ago, was addressing the issue of providing benefits to people who are transgender. Like nobody ever saw that coming, but it was right there. And so we needed to have people serving in office who were going to be with us on that conversation. So if you have, a school board that is full of people who are just there hanging out, they're retired, they feel like they didn't have anything else to do, they might not be people who are going to center equity, for example. Big issue happening right now in JCPS is centering equity and racial justice. Well, we need school board members who believe that equity and racial justice are important. So yeah, you're right, Aaron. Every single office is important. Sheriffs, officers, who's your sheriff? It's an elected position here in Jefferson County. Who is your sheriff is important. That does make a difference. Are they going to collaborate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement? We need to know these things.
And speaking of school board and education, the school board does play a pretty large part, a very large part, in just the curriculum and determining what our children learn about in schools. they have such a force and an influence. And with that curriculum, I went through JCPS. It is very lack or non-existent in the area of sexual health and knowledge. Um, and as a part of, reproductive justice, while we're fighting the fight, for policy, the fight for education and resource and access to education, um, should be a part of reproductive is a part of reproductive justice, but should be a part of reproductive justice here in the state of Kentucky. Now, how can we get reproductive justice in all of these various states that are being represented? How can we get reproductive justice as a part of curriculum and education within our public schools? And how should it happen in your wisdom, in feminine wisdom?
Good. Yeah, good question. So I can speak for Kentucky and say that Representative Lisa Wilner has sponsored legislation. I'm sure she will do so again come January 2021 around teaching comprehensive sex education in our public schools across Kentucky. Other states can do the same that haven't already. She, modeled that after other states that have already taken that step. So some states have done it and some states haven't. So I think it's important for states that haven't taken that step yet to know that there is model legislation that exists in other places. So you don't have to try to figure it out from scratch. And that's, why it's also important to have legislators who work together. Louisville's home, born and raised, but I moved to Tennessee because I wanted to go to a Black college and I wanted to go away from home. So I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee for 14 years. So Tennessee's close to my heart. And Tennessee and Kentucky are both trying to win that race to the bottom. I'm just saying because I used to live in Tennessee, so I can say that. But I also know that there are amazing people who are serving in office in Tennessee who are trying to do good and important work. And so we have connections and relationships so we can share legislation with one another and say, here's our Brianna's Law for Kentucky. Tennessee State Senator Akbari, is this something you think you would be interested in sponsoring in Tennessee? And she has sponsored Brianna's Law for Tennessee. So I think it's really important as folks are thinking about sex education, reproductive health in our public schools, that you take a look at what already exists. So you don't have to feel like, it doesn't have to feel overwhelming. Like you got to come up with all the language and words yourself, because you don't have to. Also, make sure you have relationships with your school board, because the thing that a school board can do is it can pass a supportive resolution for that state bill. A school board can say, we support Representative so-and-so's bill around reproductive health and justice being taught in our public schools, and begin to apply that pressure to the state legislative body.
Thank you for that. We have just a little over 10 minutes left in our conversation, but with these last 10 minutes, I really want to shift the focus into elections and voting and everything that is going on. We have a question, and they were referring back to when we were talking about ballot amendments and about judges' terms. And speaking of judges, we're in this period of discuss where our current president is attempting to fill the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg's position on Supreme Court. Now, I'm referencing this question. Is it, what is in the constraints? We all know that since we've had our president, there's been a lot of tweaking and manipulating of precedents of laws that are already on the books. And with the nomination for Supreme Court, how do we, on a local level and moving up to national levels, how do we raise our voices and concerns just with, all of her opinions on reproductive rights, gay marriage, thoughts on conversion therapy and different things like that? How, on a national level that seems so out of reach and so unattainable, how do we flex our voices to inflict that change?
So in a state like Kentucky, we can remind people that we actually have bipartisan support to ban conversion therapy in Kentucky. So why would we want a Supreme Court justice that believes differently than Kentuckians? In Kentucky, we can remind people that across the Commonwealth, cities and counties are passing fairness ordinances to support LGBTQ rights and housing and employment and public accommodation. So how can we support a Supreme Court justice who believes differently than that? We can keep reminding folks in Kentucky of what we believe in and what we value. We don't have to allow other people to create a narrative for us. We can create our own narrative, use our social platforms, write letters to the editor, write op-eds, contact our elected officials, our members of Congress. And again, doesn't matter whether or not you like the person. It doesn't matter whether or not they're your favorite. You still have a responsibility to contact them to let them know where you stand on this nomination. And that also includes your senator. In Kentucky, we got to contact Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell and keep applying pressure. But young folks, they've been phenomenal this summer with the Green New Deal showing up at Mitch McConnell's house and making it very clear to him, you're not going to be comfortable here. You're not going to be able to sleep well if you're not going to act on climate. Well, we need to do the same about this Supreme Court nominee, that you don't get to sleep well if you're going to try to ram through someone who is so anti to everything we believe and we value. We won't stand for it. So I believe Kentucky and every other state has the ability to flex that power if they're willing to do so. And so let's do it, because time is of the essence. We have senators running across the country who could lose their seats in November. Thank goodness. We got Jamie Harrison, we've got Reverend Warnock in Georgia. We've got the opportunity to get some folks out of office. What we have to do is let the folks that they're who's occupying those seats right now know, if you continue to try to push through this nomination, you can say goodbye to that seat by November 3rd. So that has to be part of it, right? We're not here to blow bubbles and play games. We got to take care of business, and people need to know you don't get to keep serving in these seats when you keep trying to push through hateful nominees.
And 100% right, and 100%, agree, as I'm sure many other people on this discussion do as well. It is election season. It is here. It's been breathing down our necks for the longest time. We've seen so many things trying to hinder voters from getting their voice out, from taking funding away from the postal service, to post boxes being taken up, and even just seeming like having inserts in your ballots because the language wasn't when the language wasn't quite there. And yes, that was a little shade towards some of the things we've been experiencing here, but there has been, not just for this election, there's been a growing opinion that the boxes that exist within the Board of Elections and ballot drop boxes, either next to mailboxes or outside Board of Elections, should be a long-standing thing. How is that something that we can advocate for in the future to make sure that no one can ever come for our vote through matters of which we've seen this year?
Good question. I do believe we have to first acknowledge the shadiness, acknowledge that right here in Louisville, we had a postal service delivery person who threw away in the trash over 100 ballots, right? We got to acknowledge that. We also have to acknowledge that more than 6,000 ballots here in Jefferson County, 8,000 in Lexington, and who knows how many other thousands across the Commonwealth were thrown out during the primary because of this ridiculous, you had to sign the inside and the outside of the ballot, and your signature had to match your signature from a decade ago. So, all these arbitrary reasons for throwing out people's ballots were used to throw out literally thousands of ballots. I suspect that was because they didn't want my friend and colleague, Representative Booker, to be the one challenging Mitch McConnell right now. But again, that's my commentary, not KHJN. And so what I believe we have to do moving forward to make sure that we maintain the systems that do work for us to be able to vote in a healthy and safe way is we got to apply pressure to elected officials. So right now, You have the governor and the secretary of state who worked out this deal for how we would vote in the primary, and the general here in Kentucky. Every other state has done that as well. Those are both elected officials. So we got to apply pressure to them to let them know that, yes, we want to continue to be able to vote, not even vote absentee, to vote by mail, period, with no excuse, right? We shouldn't have to have an excuse. We should be able to vote by mail, period, not even absentee. And so that should be a given. The other is that we should keep the drop boxes available to folks. With the current presidential administration attacking the United States Postal Service, I know that there are lots of concerns about the mail system. So let's maintain the drop boxes for people to drop their ballots. But let's also maintain this opportunity for people to vote in multiple locations. So right now in Jefferson County, for example, people can go to any polling location, doesn't even have to be their precinct, and they can cast their ballot. One of them is in District 41, the district that I serve at the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage. I got folks who came all the way from the east end of Louisville to the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage because, one, they wanted to be in community with us, and two, because they wanted to be able to, cast their ballot, in person. So they came down here. Let's keep that going. Why can't we keep that going? So what that means, to your question, Aaron, is that our legislature has to invest in that. Our legislature has to put the dollars into our budget. We do that every even numbered years of budget year. So we won't do a budget again until 2022. We did a one-year budget this year because of COVID. We're going to come back next year, do a few things, but not as significant. But we could possibly look at this issue. We need to put in our budget, which is our moral document, and if we believe that the foundation of our democracy is voting, we need to put the money in there to maintain vote by mail. And so the people can keep applying that pressure as these candidates are asking for your vote. Let them know, you need to know where they stand on vote by mail, not absentee, but vote by mail. And so they don't get away with asking for your vote without you applying that pressure.
Thank you for that response. And we do have time for one more question. And I did this in previous sessions, and I'm just going to continue to do it because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I also think it's very important for people to know their options in areas of getting involved with their government, with their local government and their state government. You mentioned several programs such as Emerge, which I also have a really great experience with, and just interning for them and having that opportunity to do so, having opportunities to be a page, having opportunities to volunteer and do all these wonderful things, and they're out there. But I'm noticing that the problem is, unless you're growing up in a household that constantly stresses issues in public policy and the things of the vote, that it's a privilege because you're going to have access and the knowledge to have access to those organizations. But for many individuals, it's not like that. Some people probably, a lot of people have grown up in households where they don't talk about voting. No one's ever voted. No one's ever maybe even cared to hear about what's going on the news. But for the first time, they feel ignited to do something. How can people find out about those resources that you mentioned, and what are the resources that we might not have been mentioned, just to get people involved and active and mobile in the electoral government political process?
Yeah, really good question. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do, which I never got this encouragement, is to follow people who are in office who align with your values and your belief system, because they're probably going to be sharing these opportunities on their socials, or sending social media pages, or sending them out in their e-newsletters, or even putting them in their mailers to you. Or they're having, now with COVID, virtual town halls and things like that, and doing Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, just to stay connected to people. So follow them wherever you are, because they're probably going to put information out about these opportunities to run for office. Because I can speak for myself. I want more people in office who believe in racial justice. I want more people in office who believe in reproductive justice. So I'm putting that information out there. I'm like, apply to Emerge Kentucky. I was a scholarship kid for Emerge Kentucky, and I'm not ashamed of it. I tell you every single day, I sure did get a scholarship so I could participate. So, you know, if you're somebody who struggles financially, apply to these programs and request a scholarship. Put that in your application. Let them know you really want to be a part of it, but you can't necessarily afford it. And do they have scholarships? It's okay to ask. You know, I don't want my ego to ever prevent me from having an opportunity to make a difference in my community. The other is, you know, follow some of the organizations that I've talked about, that Aaron has talked about, that are training people to run for office. So Rise to Run, Emerge. Emerge is a national organization. It's an umbrella organization, and Kentucky's part of that umbrella. Higher Heights for Kentucky, or Higher Heights for America, which does workshops and trainings for Black women to run for office. So, you know, follow all those different groups, and then share them on your social media pages as well, because you no doubt have people who are following you who aren't necessarily connected politically, right, to resources and information and tools. And so they're following you sometimes because they know you're the person who might have that and might post about it. So share once you get connected to those resources so that other people can benefit from your share.
Representative Scott, thank you so very much for your time. And speaking of social media, how can the people reach out to you?
Definitely. So you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Attica Scott, the number 4 KY. Instagram, my daughter made me get on there. So I think I'm going to take a photography class, because I don't like taking pictures, y'all. I don't have time. I'm just talking to people, not trying to take pictures. So I'm gonna take a photography class or something to do better. Instagram is really my political space. That's where, you know, I'm you know, talking about what's happening. And really for folks who are interested in what's happening with our legislature in Kentucky, I try to keep people informed. And then Facebook, State Representative Attica Scott, and that is also a place where I do, you know, I post like articles and stuff to help educate people. But if you're looking for more analysis, that's going to be on my Twitter feed. Thank y'all so much for this opportunity.
No problem.
I appreciate you, Aaron.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to help you out. I'm going to take a selfie. I'm going to tag you in your Instagram. There you go. You'll see that. And before we close, thank you to everyone who has attended Take Root. This is our last session for the year 2020. So give yourselves a round of applause for joining us virtually. Shout out to my squad to my left, who have been really just awesome and beneficial. And just making a way for this to happen despite COVID. It has been a feat in which we have conquered despite technical difficulties. So thank you to my squad. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Raising Women's Voices, National Advocates for Pregnant Women, Ms. Foundation, Overbrook Foundation, Digital Defense Fund, Abortion Access Front, National Institute of Reproductive Health, Women Help Women, Jones Due Process, Midwest Access Coalition, Center for Reproductive Rights, If, When, How, and ACLU of Kentucky. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I can't wait to see you all, hopefully in person, next year. Take care, everyone.